This meeting is being recorded.
It is my privilege to introduce to you Dr. David Cassady, currently president of Baptist Seminary of Kentucky. And I think most of you know his tenure in building and promoting Smith Helmuth, his work with Faith Lab, and his, I think your early work at Southern was with John Hendricks.
Yes,
And
my
you,
doctor
and you,
work was there.
and you still admit that.
Yes, absolutely.
That's good. David has been a president at BSK for, is it 6 years now, David?
It is. Yep.
6 years. I was fortunate enough to be on the search committee that called him to BSK, and some of my best work has been search committee work at Southern and in the past, and I'm certainly proud to have been a part of this one. David, if you will share with us kind of where BSK is, where theological education for Baptists are, and open yourself up to questions, and maybe even cast a vision for what in the world we're going to do to survive as a community of faith. So I turn it over to you. Thank you. Anything else you want to add other than you married above yourself with Regina, and you have one child and one grandchild. Is that correct?
I have 2 children and 1 grandchild as of Sunday. Our first
As of
grandchild was
Sunday.
born on Sunday, so
I had heard that.
yeah, we're still basking in the glow. So
Well, introduce anything else about yourself you would like to. Welcome.
yeah, thank you so much, Wade. Thank you. And of course, everything I really learned from Wade and Mike. I've got 2 former professors on here. It's great to see you, Mike. I haven't seen you in years. It's good to see you doing well. I do follow your cars on Facebook.
Thank you.
And of course, I know Chuck Bug, who has worked with BSK across the years. And Chuck, it's good to see you as well.
Thank you.
I do want to talk to you today about BSK and frankly, BSK as much as anything as an example of a lot of what's going on in theological education. It is, as I'm sure you know from talking to different leaders in theological education, an enormously transformative time we're living in. It's a challenging season for theological education for multiple reasons. And I'm going to go into some trends in just a moment that we are seeing, probably you're seeing in other schools, because it is the ground feels like it's constantly shifting beneath us. And so, Wade, I wish I did have a response in terms of the future of theological education. I might be able to give some hints about what we're seeing, but if anybody figures that puzzle out, be sure and let me know. I'd love to talk with you. So I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. Oops, looks like I need permission, Andy.
Let me figure this out. I'm not.
Okay. I
Remove
think if you hit
spotlight.
the,
Okay. I'm gonna make you co-host. That'll do it.
that'll do it too.
Okay. Okay. You should be set.
All right. Yes. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. So I wanted to talk about a few trends that we're certainly seeing, but also I think are indicative of other schools. I will also say that I've had the privilege of being elected to the Board of Commissioners for the Association of Theological Schools. I started service in January of 2023. And so I sit now on the group that looks over self-studies and approves accreditations and petitions, new degree programs. And it, for me, has been remarkably educational to be part of that work, because you get a look into the life of so many other institutions, some very different from us and some similar to us. But it is, for me, it is worth the effort to be with the commissioners, just because of all the things I get to see and learn and be exposed to. So that's been super helpful. For BSK, we as a bit of an introduction to us, if you're not as familiar with BSK as some of you may be, you can find our commitments on our website. If you go to bsk.edu and look under the About menu, you'll see there's a commitments area, and you can look through those and get a sense. But overall, following BSK across the years, you'll see that this sense of practical theology being important to us is just part of our DNA. This sense that we are preparing practitioners is a core part of our sense of what we are about here at BSK. So yeah, we do have students from time to time who come along who say, I want to be a professor in a seminary one day. We will say to them, you are welcome here, and we are academically rigorous, but our focus is on developing practitioners. You might want to select a school that has a more academically directed approach to prepare you for a PhD program. So again, that's just a way of contrasting us perhaps a bit, but that's a core part of who we are at BSK. Pastoral care, as Wade will tell you, and he is responsible for a great deal of this focus, continues to be a central part of our DNA. In fact, we are right now in the finishing stages of a new hire for a new full-time professor for pastoral care at BSK. So I'm really going to be excited to share that person with you in the coming weeks. Hopefully we'll have an announcement this spring to that effect. But that is part of our ongoing commitment. It's impossible to replace a Wade Rowett, but we do want to continue to have the capacity to focus there, because so many of our students have come to us for that reason, or moved on into chaplaincies or pastoral counseling roles, or just developed their skills more fully as ministers for dealing with counseling needs that are part of ministry, to dealing with trauma, which is so much a part of our lives nowadays. So that's huge for us and continues to be an attractor for students who come to us. We have, since our beginning, been a proponent and advocate for, supporter of women in ministry. And that focus continues to be central to our work. In fact, in just a couple of weeks, you're going to see a new podcast that will be coming out of our brand new studio. We have a new audio video studio. Andy, you'll want to stop by and see this. It's at Crescent Hill Baptist Church. And it's going to allow us to generate all kinds of cool content. The first podcast is actually going to be focused on women in ministry, and that'll be coming out in just a couple of weeks. I think it's a 7-episode series there that's put together by Reverend Erica Whitaker, who's on our staff. So watch for that. Racial justice is a theme that has become very important to us, particularly since 2015. Dr. Earwood received an invitation from Kevin Cosby, a president at Simmons College. Simmons is an HBCU in Louisville, and had a vision for a seminary that would be deeply connected with an HBCU, a historically black college or university. And so we began that journey then, and then when I came on board, picked that up and continued to run with it. We now have a full ATS accredited site at Simmons. The Institute for Black Church Studies out of BSK is there at Simmons, and we relish that relationship. It has led to us being named, as of 2020, the official seminary for the National Baptist Convention of America. That's a black church denomination, around 3 million members strong. And it has had a dramatic effect on our student body and our growth. I'll be showing you more on that in a bit. And then finally, partnerships like these I've mentioned have just been huge for us in terms of ways for us to connect to audiences and to get feedback on what they need so that we can be a responsive school. And that responsiveness, I think, is part of the future of theological education. As churches and communities and chaplaincy and pastoral counseling, as all of these areas change rapidly, we've got to be good listeners in order to be able to continue to shape what we offer in ways that make a difference there. Speaking of responsiveness, low student debt has been a tradition at BSK, where 80% of our students graduate with zero additional student debt from seminary. Those that do graduate with debt have less than $5,000. Most people don't believe me when I say that, but hey, you can check with ATS and see it right there for yourself. I hope we can continue that tradition. It's challenging to do in this season. But it's been important to us because, again, if you talk to churches, you talk to ministers, they're not exactly flush with cash right now. And so having a pile of student debt does not help someone enter or serve in ministry. It doesn't help churches receive new ministers. So that those are some themes that I wanted to start with just to kind of show where we are centered in terms of our focus. I did mention earlier our partnership with the National Baptist Convention, Simmons College, but we're also partnered with the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. These are all informal partnerships in the sense they're not legal, there's no controlling interest from these groups in BSK. Instead, they're driven by MOUs where we say we will walk alongside each other. We share a commitment to theological education for our people, and so we work together to meet those needs. It's been very helpful to us. It sharpens our focus and helps us know where we need to put energy to meet the needs of our partners. A unique part of our partnership with CBF is that we have formed specific state or regional partnerships. Clearly, we've been partnered with CBF Kentucky from the beginning. But we, some years ago, I lose track of time, but a couple of years ago, we partnered officially with the CBF of Virginia to be their distance education partner for theological education. And begun picking up students there and meeting the needs of ministers who need to study where they live and serve. Same thing for Florida, CBF Florida and the Caribbean Islands. About a year and a half ago, we also formed an MOU relationship with them. We've actually been active in the Caribbean Islands with a training program for Black pastors there, and enjoyed a tour across Florida with Tammy Snyder, the coordinator, last year. Been wonderful to get to meet people, travel around these states, hear what's needed. That's been key for us. So I want to move into a section, and then I am going to stop talking and let you ask questions. So, but I want to plow through these real quickly. This one is probably the most shocking of the graphs that you'll see. This is a look at the age of our student body as of fall 2023. And you see that big purple section there. That's students age 51 to 65. We have students as old as 72 in our programs right now, and as young as 26. But the majority, you see the green and the purple, 40 and up. That's the majority of our student body. And wow, is that different than when I was in seminary? But it is part of the reality we're seeing. And a lot of it is our students that either from the MBCA, we know that we have had an influx of ministers who wanted to go to seminary for a long time and never had the opportunity. But now that we're fully online, they're able to do that from where they live and serve. So that has brought in that group. We also know that we're seeing more students who are second and third career. They're moving into ministry as a new part of their career journey and making their way to seminary. Race. The blue box you see here, I would contrast this chart you're looking at now with 2016. In 2016, 92% of our student body was white. As of 2023, you can see, and I don't know the exact percentage there, but it's something like 70-something% of our student body is Black. We have become a predominantly African-American seminary over the last few years. And a lot of that, again, has come through partnerships. So, Ben, back to your question, Wade, what does the future look like for seminaries? I think part of it is partnering with groups who need theological education and who are willing to help support it. And I think that connecting with them, again, brings the growth and it brings the purpose for our work. Now, we continue to be strong CBF proponents, and as we are starting and growing these relationships with state CBFs, I fully expect the green area to balance out more in the coming years. I think we saw a pretty large influx from the MBCA early on that I think will balance out. So my gut is that over the next 2 years, we'll see this balance into more of a 50-50 kind of a look, which we frankly think is fabulous, because the idea of white students and black students studying together for their seminary career, knowing that they're building trust, they're learning how to talk about issues that matter, that's hard to do. They're going to be moving into communities and leading in ministry with a skill set and a relationship set that gives them the ability, hopefully, to help us as communities begin to really grapple with the racial issues that are so important in our world in these days. Pace. Pace is really different than when I was in seminary. When I was in seminary, I was a full-time student and I worked part-time in a church. I got my MDiv in 3 years. Now, it's much more prevalent for students to be part-time students and full-time at work. They get their MDiv now in 5 to 7 years. And that's even taking into account the fact that my MDiv was 90 hours. Yours probably was too. Nowadays, most MDivs have had to reduce for this very reason. Our MDiv is 75 hours now, and that's become very common across ATS schools for this very reason, so that people can wrap this up at some point. It also is why you're probably seeing statistics that the MA programs at seminaries are increasing. In fact, in 2022, I believe it was, for the first time in ATS history, there were more students enrolled in Master of Arts programs at theological schools than in MDiv programs. And so for that reason, BSK is launching our first Master of Arts program this fall, Master of Arts in Ministry Studies. But that pace, that's really different now than what it used to be. The approach, of course, has changed. When I was in seminary, it was fully in person. And even for BSK, up until 2020, we were fully in person. You had to live in Kentucky to attend our seminary. Now we are fully online, and we have students across 16 states, which boggles our mind, because we didn't realize we had a presence where they would even know we existed in 16 states. And yet here we are. And so I think going back to that initial slide where I talk about those themes that are important to us, I think those themes help students select schools, and they find their way to us because they see us as a school where those things matter. We are also a bit of an outlier in theological education in that we are growing. This is a chart of our growth since fall of 2013, which is pretty early in our history. We're 21 years old this year. And you can see that the scale really, we started in 2013, we were around 31 students, it looks like. And now we're up over 51 students enrolled. And then if you do head count, which includes auditors, which has become more popular lately, you see that head count now jumps up to over 60. We dipped down as low as 20 students in 2017. So from 20 students to 60 students is not a bad jump over that several years period. And again, I would say the reasons we're seeing that growth have to do with, one, partnerships. People have found us through partnerships, trust us through partnerships. Those matter. And secondly, I think the online approach has made a huge difference for people's ability to come here. The reason Virginia and Florida said to me they want to partner with BSK is because they said in the past we would have persons called to ministry out of churches, say in Virginia, and those persons would then go away to seminary, and so many times they would never come home. And so Virginia is like, we need ministers here, and we want to keep our folks here. In Florida the same way. So our ability to help people study from where they live and serve is so important, and I think that's part of the growth. And then the last part of the growth I'll talk about in a moment, in what I'm going to tease you with for just a minute, and that's this idea of homegrown ministers. I'll come back to that in just a second. Oh, wait, that's my next slide. What a nice segue. Who put these together? So we have identified a new theme that is certainly real. And I think as I describe it, you're going to recognize it and know of churches that are dealing with this. So we get calls, like all seminaries do, saying, hey, we've got a youth ministry position open. Can you send us a set of resumes? We'd like to interview. And we say, no, we can't. For two reasons. One, all our students already work full-time, and you're offering a part-time job. Number two, all our students work full-time and need full-time salaries, and yours is a part-time job. And three, we don't have a lot of folks coming through seminary now who have the goal of being youth, children, or music ministers. And I hate saying those words, I really do, but that is the reality. So instead, what we say to churches is, how can we help you to develop within your congregation and your community leaders who will take on the roles of ministry leadership for children and youth and music? And you probably have seen it. You've seen it in music because, the church will, likely a church that has had a full-time seminary trained minister of music for years, you have seen shift to now they have someone who has a music degree, probably teaches in music at a school somewhere, and then also does the music ministry at the church on the side, but they may or may not have any seminary. For children and youth, it's even more stark, where you often will have school teachers who also then will play a role, or it may be parents, or it may be firefighters or health workers. There are people for whom the youth ministry or children's ministry roles are a part-time side gig to what they do to make a living. Some churches are even moving to have teams of these, where they will have two people or three people who will fill the leadership role for children or youth. It's brand new. So for us as a seminary, the question we've been asking then is, how in the world do we help churches in this nurturing and developing of these persons? And how can we do it in a way that recognizes they're already working full time and they're doing all these things? How do we help them get equipped in some level, informed in some way to be leaders and be quality ministers? Because we know there is a difference, and deeply believe there is a difference in the leadership of those who have seminary education and who do not. That formation matters. So I'm going to go to my last slide. This is our response to all of these trends. If you looked at this chart in 2015, you would see one green box with MDiv written in it. Now in 2024, you see multiple options, multiple ways for persons to engage theological education. Very briefly, the blue boxes are our Flourish courses. These are non-credit. They're like, you take them online, use it on your iPad. They're synchronous, so you just watch videos. There's no credit given. There's no homework. They're just easy to use. They're aimed primarily at laypersons or someone who just needs to catch up on a certain area. We've got them on things like youth ministry, children's ministry, intro to the Bible. We've had a pastoral care one during COVID. We had some Black church studies focused ones, and we're going to be adding to it over this year and next year. But once you go below that let's go to the brown boxes, BSK certificates. Those are bite-sized graduate studies. So these are the exact same courses that someone would take in our master's or MDiv programs, but they're grouped into 9-hour chunks, just 9 hours, and you get a BSK certificate. but they're graduate hours, so they go on your transcript. So you can pick lots of different areas. We have two beginning ministry certificates that help people just get started. We have one in pastoral care. We have one in Black church studies, rural ministry. I'm probably forgetting some, but we have multiple topics. We're going to be adding one in church communications because that's an area where a lot of churches are hiring full-time, is for church communicators. We think a seminary background is helpful even there. So then you move into the green, the MA and the MDiv. Those are known degrees, we understand. The BSK certificates, if I started and said, I don't know if I want to tackle an MA, I just want to do a certificate. I'm going to do this beginning ministry certificate because I'm a homegrown minister who's working with teenagers at my church now. I'm going to take these 3 courses and get my certificate. Well, I do that, and then I go, wow, I really enjoyed that. I got a benefit out of that. I want to move on and get a master's. Those 3 courses, because their graduate hours roll right into the MDiv or the MA, so they have invested in their future, and it motivates them, hopefully, to move into a larger degree program. And they can do that. They can roll into either one. And then on the other side, the BSK certificates help people who already have their graduate degree. So we have students right now, we have alumni who came through BSK years ago or another school, and they say, you know, we didn't have Black church studies programs when I was in seminary. I would love to know more about the Black church tradition. So they'll come and do a 3-course Black church studies certificate with us and add that on as a way of continuing education. Or we also have ministers, alumni who say, I didn't do much with pastoral care when I was in seminary, but wow, do I find myself needing that more as a minister. They come back and get that certificate. So it creates this ability to do a more lifelong learning approach with some bite-sized components in there for our homegrown ministers and for those who simply need to get a taste to get started, because it's all so different nowadays. So I'm going to hush for just a minute, and I'm going to stop my share, and I'm happy to field questions and show my ignorance.
Do you want us to ask the questions or put them in the chat?
I tell you what, if you want to put them in chat, that might work best.
Well, while they're typing theirs in, I, of course, want to thank you for your presentation and doing that. But I find myself wondering how the polarization, and particularly the characterization of evangelical Christians as all supporters of right-wing politics and racism, might be impacting either the classroom or the students or recruiting with such a African American presence. There seems to be more polarizing between white Christians and African American in the public media, at least.
In the public media, I think there is. Abby Sizemore is our director of admissions, and she and I talk about this because you know, she's on the front lines talking with people. And she finds that for most of the white ministers who come in, again, if they find their way to BSK and mean to be with us and not a Southern Baptist seminary, they're typically, they see that as a plus. Oh, I'm going to be in class and I'm going to get to know Black leaders and the Black church. They think that's a plus. The downside, though, to what you describe is that I think those trends you've described have so turned off a huge generation of young people that is part of why you see that aging graph that I showed you. Young people, so I had a board member tell me this last year. She said, and she was working in a congregation with young people, and she said, David, I have some incredible young people who would make fabulous ministers, but if they want to change the world with their lives and their career, they don't see ministry as a path to doing that. And that's hard to hear. But I think a lot of it is the reasons you've mentioned, Wade, that polarization, that stereotype that everything's gone to the right, it really has harmed us among so many people. And I do worry about how long it's going to take to recover in those age groups. And we're seeing a ministry shortage emerging because of it as well. You're probably seeing it in your congregations where it's harder and harder to fill positions. I've talked to churches, I mean, significant churches like Calvary Baptist here in Lexington, where they have full-time, well-paid benefits position open, couldn't get resumes.
David, Bob Browning here.
Hi, Bob.
Good to see and
You too.
hear from you today. What part of your presentation that you sent us or that you showed us, what part of that is unique to BSK and you're not aware of other seminaries that are doing that?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think the unique, some of it is a unique way we approach some of these. So I think most seminaries, not all, most are seeing an aging of their population. Most are seeing an increase in African American percentages of their student body, or others. There are other groups that, you know, they're strong with Asian communities or Latinos and all of that. But I think the diversity, we're seeing more. Let me put it the other way. The white male is an endangered species in theological education, which is crazy when you think about how many of our churches really still only want to look at white males. That's going to become an issue in the next 10 years. But anyway, back to answering your question, I would say that the homegrown area is probably one where we are ahead of the curve, particularly there, in the way we are crafting these micro credentials, these bite-sized ways for people to get into theological education. The way, like I said, we've got a brand new studio set up at Crescent Hill in Louisville that's going to allow us to generate podcast and video series and panel discussions and all kinds of things, many of which will have absolutely no credit attached to them, but they are ways of teaching. So I think as a seminary, our interest in being a microphone, a teaching source, apart from just graduate certifications, I think is a bit of a distinctive.
David, it's Larry here. When you have a faculty slot open up, where are you going to get new faculty?
Well, we do have a slot open right now for pastoral care. We put out ads in the usual places, you know, in higher education journals, and we also publicized across disciplines in the sense that, you know, there are persons within pastoral care, for example, where they were able to send these out to blasts of groups within their communities and get the word out. We didn't have any trouble getting a good stack of resumes from people who are very well qualified. In fact, we feel fortunate that we're at the point right now in our search process where we've got multiple persons, any of whom would do a fabulous job. And there's a fair amount of diversity in those as well. And so that's, which is very important for us as we move forward. So we're not seeing a shortage on the professor side. I think there's still a glut of persons out there who have the ability and the interest to teach, where we're seeing the shortages on the ministry side for congregations.
Thank you.
David, if I could ask another question, what part of your presentation appeals to donors?
The part where it shows we're growing.
Yeah, sure.
That probably would be number one. I think the homegrown is an area where there's beginning to be a growing interest there, because if somebody's been a part of a congregation where they've had a turnover in youth, children, music, and they know where they've ended up, they get it. They say, "Oh, that's real. We want to be part of helping make that work." So I think that one probably would be first, but you correct me if you see one that's more interesting.
No. I think that connectedness to the local church is very strong in your presentation.
We
Dave,
are.
This
Go
is
ahead.
Chuck. Chuck, first of all, I want to thank you for your presentation. And, I learned some things I didn't know about BSK, particularly this homebound approach, because our family is a member of a church here in Georgetown. We have just lost 2 full-time staff members. One going to another church and another one going to position in CBF. I don't see, from where I look, I don't see any way that we're going to get 2 full-time people to fill those positions, given where our budget is, given what we can pay. But, what you have said, that really has great appeal to me. And I wonder if that word is getting, I know we had a committee appointed in our church that brought a recommendation about what we should do in the future related to staff positions. Well, very good people on the committee. I don't think we're going to be able to do what they're proposing, because what they're proposing is 2 more full-time staff people with various responsibilities, youth and seniors. And you know how it is. I mean, my experience is whenever you get somebody who is doing 2 things, usually they're much better in one and wind up spending their time in that. But, I am excited about that, because I can't wait to tell our church that there is another way that maybe we haven't considered. I think that's just great. And I think what you're doing is at BSK is so imaginative and wonderful, and just has a great feel to it, David. I want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Chuck. And we'd love to be of help. I know your church and,
Yeah.
Again, what we're saying to churches like that are, let's work to find those persons in your congregation who maybe as a team want to tackle this ministry,
Right.
and then get them signed up for a certificate program,
Right.
which isn't a high lift and helps get them on the ground. Anyway, we'd love to be helpful there. But yeah, we're seeing this. It's just a massive dynamic. We were disappointed last year because we submitted in a hurry a big grant ask to Lilly to help fund a propulsion of this work in the homegrown area, and we were turned down. It's so competitive nowadays to get Lilly grants. We do have one, but getting 2 or 3 that's a trickier beast. I will say that I talk regularly with Paul Baxley at CBF. He's seeing the same dynamics out there in congregations, and has just been a massive supporter of this work. But we are going to be, to Bob's point, we're going to be putting together a kind of a prospectus for how we see additional programming that could support this homegrown focus. And we're going to be taking that out to pitch that and see if we can raise the money. We're targeting, I'll just put a number out. We'd love to get $200,000 for the first year to help get that off the ground. And I could bore you with the details, but we have a proposed structure of additional ways that we think we could look at theological education, not from what does it look like in the past and how can we adjust it, but let's start with the homegrown minister. What do they need, and what are they likely to spend time and money participating in? How do we build that? So that's going to take some money and time, but I'm hopeful that we will find those that are passionate about that will help us.
Mm-hmm. Good.
You may not use these terms, but who does BSK, which institutions does BSK consider to be their competitors? And then do you, and if so, how do you collaborate with some sister institutions?
collaboration is clearly a growing trend in education, and we are looking for partners all the time. We do partner with Simmons College. We have done things with Georgetown College and would love to do more. And those, of course, are local. But I think what I would love to have conversation around is other organizations, schools where there are shared kinds of goals and purposes that we could partner on because all of us need to save money. All of us need to do more with less. And so where we could share staff, we're looking at that. Where we could share faculty, we're looking at that. And if you know of groups that would be interested in partnering around that sort of work or partnering on programs, I would love to have those conversations. Yeah, so we obviously we have competitors. We have schools, that students will choose to go to instead of us. But at this point in time, we really don't think that way very much because honestly, we're growing at such a rate. We'd rather focus on some of these other areas, and at least while we have the luxury that growth is happening anyway.
David, I've not met you. I'm Hewlett Glore.
Hey, Hewlett, I know your books. I think you were publishing with Smith & Hellis while I was there.
I was indeed. Yeah, thank you. But I'm going to tell you, I appreciate so much your presentation today and the work y'all are doing at BSK. I'm going to ask a little different question. Most of us came up through SBC seminaries, did MDiv, PhDs there, and became sort of natural candidates for SBC seminary faculty positions. We don't have that pipeline anymore. So where do you go now to look for new faculty in terms of seminaries?
I mean, so thankfully we've had low turnover, so that's been helpful. So that, I graduated from Southern. Our Mark Medley on our faculty graduated from Southern. But some of our younger faculty we have come through Wake Forest, and that continues to be a good spot where people are coming out with strong degrees for teaching. Duke is another place that is generating a good number of folks, and we have a Duke grad as well. So we've looked at those places, but and to be honest, I haven't seen all the resumes for the pastoral care position. I'll be one of the last jumps for that process, but I will be eager to see where these folks are from because I think it may well be from circles we're not used to seeing.
David, I think John has his history degree from Baylor, not on the seminary side, but on the university side, doesn't he?
I think you're correct. Yes, thank you. John Inskaresic, our church history professor. Thank you. And I did some time at Baylor a long time ago in philosophy.
I know. I have a question. Go ahead, Larry, if you.
I'll jump in one more time, then I'll keep my mouth shut. I know. Who don't believe it? Who are you accountable to? What's your governance structure?
So I, as president, am accountable to our board of trustees.
And how do you get that board of trustees?
The board of trustees is self-perpetuating. They have their own nominating committee, and they select and invite on board new trustees who serve. They serve 3-year terms. They can serve 2 in a row if they wish. It's about 17, I believe, on our board right now. It's a mixture of everything from business leaders, attorneys, ministers, alumni, just folks all across, financial leaders, accountants. So we try to have a mix on the board, but they self-perpetuate. I do from time to time bring them names of persons I think who might be worth considering, but they are under no compulsion to take those. And they bring people to the board I've never met before. And I meet them, of course, beforehand, and they listen to what I say if I have an opinion on the board member. But it is a self-perpetuating entity, and they carry the fiduciary responsibility for the school. And we do follow the procedures prescribed by ATS. We've done a lot of training through the Entrust Center, which works with theological education and their boards. So this notion of shared governance is very important to us. Very briefly, shared governance is a three-legged stool. You have the board of trustees, you have the administration, the president, and then you have faculty. And they each carry areas where they bring primary responsibility, but ultimately the board is where the buck stops.
Could anybody but that board fire you?
No.
Okay, good.
Nope, they're fully in charge.
David, this is Chuck again. Just two quick things. Have you, has BSK given any thought to a DMin degree? And secondly, with the dearth of people who are going into preaching pastoral ministry, have you thought about anything that can be done in some of those various offerings that you have that can be helpful in there? Because what I'm hearing is, you talked about the white male, but I'm so grateful to see, particularly here in Kentucky, we've had a number of women who have come into churches. Yeah, I hope I live to see the day where we may have an African American in a predominantly white church. But if that's happening, I'm not aware of it. I think still the racial factor is going to be in that. So what about the preaching? I mean, what are you doing? What is the seminary doing to help ministers who are already out in the ministry?
So we have conversation about a DMin fairly regularly. There are calls for us from our alumni to offer a DMin, and then particularly from the Black church community, there have been a lot of calls for a DMin. The reason we have not done so yet is we are still a small school. We have a small faculty and staff. We're like the little engine that could, and so we try to be very careful with our capacity to make sure we're pointing it. Right now, we're launching an MA program. And once we get that launched and feel good about it, I think we'll be able to turn around and give attention to the DMin. My question to groups that bring up DMin has been twofold. One, are the people who are asking for the DMin willing to pay for the DMin? Sorry, that's my job to ask. And two, what can we do in the DMin space that's not already being offered? Because there are a lot of DMin programs out there that are excellent. What would we offer that's unique in that space? Because I feel like we probably would need to do something unique. Otherwise, we get that burst of people who just want to study with BSK because they're alums or whatever. And then what do we do after that? So those are my two questions. But all that to say, that's on the table. It's just not on the table this year.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of your preaching, I mean, in terms of, I think part of the question is how do we begin to help churches to nurture that next generation of pastors, whether they're women or men, and that vocational, that sense of calling language that we don't speak as much as we used to in congregations. I think part of what we want to do with the studio is to help generate some content that congregations can use that might actually help people begin to grapple with, am I called to be a minister, a pastor, a preacher? And hopefully help give congregations some tools that could pay off years from now as persons do begin responding to a call to ministry and to preaching. But the other side of it is simply the same old, we are seeing, and this, I hear this from Paul Baxley when we were talking the other day. He said, David, what you're saying about children, youth, and music ministers is ultimately going to come to the pulpit. And he said, I think it's going to happen sooner than we wish it would. And we're going to need ways to work with training bivocational, co-vocational pastors who are going to carry that preaching load, but probably have no seminary. And so that's, of course, terrifying for a denominational leader because, you know, if we don't have persons who can discern the kind of theological posture that we think is so important, that's going to really threaten our very denominational structures. So.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, David.
Anyone else have a question? Or are we ready to thank David again and wrap this up?
Bob, you're muted.
This goes back to the homegrown concept. And I'm happy for anyone to correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like this came into vogue some years ago when larger churches, more very conservative churches, were not. I remember when I was ordained, they all came from the association and questioned me, and this was a council that could have voted me down. Anyway, so then it looks like we reverted, and it seems to me like the leaders in that were the more conservative, who didn't want to call someone who'd been exposed to things they didn't like. So I don't see a real problem with what you are talking about, but have you discussed that sort of thing of how do you avoid the inbreeding, and how do you add to the inbreeding to get a good product?
No, it's a really good question. I mean, it's very insightful. We've had conversations with some pastors who are like, to tell us horror stories about someone who bubbled up out of their congregation to do leadership who really wasn't competent in some areas,
Yes.
or maybe even
Right.
dangerous in some areas. And then how do you deal with that
Right.
when they're already members of the congregation and people know them? So you're absolutely right. It is tricky as it can be, and we're going to have to help. We're going to have to help these homegrown students, I think, figure some of this stuff out on their own. And maybe our processes, that being part of courses and groups, will help them figure out some of that. But I think we're going to need some denominational resource help. For us, that would be CBF, MBCA, where they can help churches with some tools for vetting and for giving the pastors or personnel committees some cover, even if needed, for those who may need to not be there anymore.
And it just dawns on me that you're talking about denominational sports, so that means a little money. You could have a long weekend or whatever, and bring those people all together and just talk about the cold hard facts that if you think you're going to be a great minister just because you're already a member of that church and think you know it, you got another thing coming. And just talk plainly with them, and then maybe do some online seminars with the pastors where you talk to them about the help that you can give. So,
well, and I think, honestly, and to your point, even the personnel committees are going to need some orientation to think differently, because supervising a homegrown is going to be very different than supervising a full-time seminary trained minister.
Right.
So how do they do that? What's the care and feeding of a homegrown minister look like?
Okay. So y'all are already thinking about that.
Well, we haven't figured it out, but we have the questions.
Wait, now work on a program.
Please. Thank you.
We'll give that to Larry McSwain.
We'll get Larry in on it.
David, I do have a question. And if you don't want to respond, that's okay. I know BSK has been for some time open and affirming toward gay persons. And I know some of our graduates are now in local churches serving on church staff. And I know that in many of the Black churches that I've worked with, they have not been as open to that. How has our open and affirming stance been nuanced or been confronted by our friends in the African American churches who aren't necessarily where we are on those issues? And how do you deal with that political tension?
No, that's a really good question. And it's real. That's a very real dynamic. It is, and not, and and I don't want to do too broad a brush. It's a mixed bag in terms of perspectives in the African American tradition, just as it is with us. But it's certainly there is a dominance there. It also shows up in the women's issue. Because there is in the African American church, at least in certain traditions, a more patriarchal leaning and structure there. So how does that work when we have women ministers in class right beside them? And that has come up. So in class, of course, we can deal with it. We have the power, so to speak, to be good educators and to use that as a teachable moment and work with it. But when you're talking about partnerships and denominations and churches that support, you're right, that's a tricky bag. Our approach to date has been that when we form partnerships, we are as honest as we can be with the leadership about who we are. We're like, look, we are this. We're not going to ask you to be us. And we would like it and appreciate it, and this partnership won't work if you ask us to be you. So it's very much like that friendship where you have two people who are different. They might even be on different political spectrums, but they are close friends because they have chosen to value each other for who they are and not ask each other to change. So that to say, I have had chats with leadership in the Black church tradition where we have had very straight up conversations, and they have said to me, David, you've always told us who you all are. We know who you are. And even though we're different than that, we're going to respect that. And we know you need to do what you need to do. And we respect them on the same side. So I don't ask a Black pastor, for example, in our classes to believe a certain way about women in ministry or LGBTQ leaders. I do ask them to be respectful. I do ask them to treat one another with love and respect and care. That's what we can ask for. And so that's been our approach. And so far, I'm going to knock on wood, it's working. And to me, it's the only way partnerships can work. Otherwise you turn into who's in charge, and that's hard. There are enough power dynamics in race without us adding to it.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question?
David, when you're talking to donors especially, but students as well, prospective students, but when you're talking to donors, do they talk about social issues, not only gay rights, but abortion, immigration, healthcare, gun control? Do they bring those things up?
Not very often, no.
Okay.
No. It's really much more focused on the life of the local church and what is going, what is what we are doing, how does that assist? Because most donors, they're connected with a local congregation, and that's their visceral point. I wish there were more conversations about those issues, because I think it's part of what sets us apart is our particular stance. But yeah, not very often.
Well, I don't know exactly how to ask what's kind of reverberating in my mind now. David, I don't really know. What I observe nationally is the decline of the power and the influence of the church. And when you do the census information, the number of people who are nuns, they don't have any religious affiliation. Is what you are doing the way to combat that decline? There are powerful churches, strong churches, generally influential and affluent churches that have not changed their patterns. They still always go for the full-time professional minister, not necessarily the homegrown one. Are you combating that? Is this going to be a way to lead the church back to the strong clout that it once had?
I'm gonna speak frankly. I don't think so. I wish I was more optimistic about that. My not speaking for BSK, but just from where I sit, I think that the issues like Bob was just listing, whether it be gun violence or abortion or climate change or any number of social issues, racial justice, young people, nuns of any age, I think are far more interested in making a difference in areas like that. And until congregations are able to show that they can make relevant response to these things, I'm not sure the nuns are going to pay much attention, period. I think another thing I watch for and hope for and pray for is some new expressions of church that might catch the attention of the nuns and begin to find ways, creative ways to connect with them, to be led by them. But I don't know what that's going to look like. I'm an old dog now. So I would love to see some of those expressions rise up, and would hope that BSK would pay attention to them if and when they do. But that's just my honest, pessimistic take.
Thank you. The old dog reference you made, you're just a kid.
You're so kind.
I'm 93, so I am not necessarily a young dog anymore. Been a good ride, though. I've loved it.
You've done a lot of good.
I say that I have ridden the crest of the Baptist wave. I have in my ministry. I became a minister when I was 17 in 1947. That's a good while ago. It's been a good way to live one's life.
It has, and I'm glad
A lot
you
of
did
my
it.
friends are pictured on the screens here today, by the way, who helped me with that ride.
We all need each other.
Well, thank you, David. Anybody else? Wade, anything else from you?
Thank you again, David. Thank you to the seminary friends here for your thoughtful, delightful questions and for stretching our imaginations and minds in new directions.
Thank you, David.
Thank you all. You can go to bsk.edu